Meantime, former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is speaking out about the COVID-19 outbreak in his home province of Quebec, particularly how it's gripped long-term care homes. In an article that he wrote for Maclean's magazine, Mulcair says Quebec's government knew what was happening for more than a month, but failed to act. And Tom Mulcair is standing by, joining me now. Of course, nowadays he is a political commentator for us here at CTV News as well. Good to see you, Tom, and thanks for this.
Hi, Todd. Thank you.
So your take on what happened here and why the government, in your opinion, didn't act?
Well, I think that once the vicious circle started, it was too late. They couldn't get themselves out of this death spiral. British Columbia acted right away. As soon as news started coming in from Europe at the end of March, they realized that one of the principal vectors was the health workers themselves. You couldn't move them from site to site, from center to center. So Bonnie Henry, the extraordinary head of public health in BC, immediately came out with a hard and fast rule, not just a guideline, to go back to what you were saying before. Ontario followed suit in the middle of April. Quebec talked about it for over a month, said, well, yeah, ideally they shouldn't, but they couldn't do anything because they were already missing so many workers. So they were not even being tested. It was only yesterday that Quebec announced that they would start testing those health workers, and they were moving, let's say, from one long-term care center with no COVID-19 into another one that was full of it, and then back. So it was a predictable result, and it was entirely preventable because they didn't do it. We've gone through this tragedy. More than 2,000 seniors have died in Quebec alone in those residences in the past 7 weeks.
Where do you think the buck stops on this, Tom, then?
Well, Mr. Legault was sitting down with his senior health administrators yesterday, and he came up with a solution. He said, we're going to nationalize all of the private seniors' residences, but that's simply beside the point. It's not a question of whether it's private or public. It's a question of whether you're enforcing the rules. Quebec was doing almost no inspections in the public or the private. They say they're doing one every 3 years, but it's really less than that, and they're not even getting it done. So unless we learn how to put in place strong standards and enforce them, nothing will be done. And that's why I was a bit disappointed when Prime Minister Trudeau, in a sharp exchange on Wednesday with Jagmeet Singh, said, well, I'm going to have nothing to do with the federal government playing a role in long-term care. And that simply begs the question, well, why not? If in the 1960s, the provinces who have primary responsibility for healthcare were able to sign a deal with the then federal government to bring in Medicare, why can't we widen that, modernize it when we realize that this is this incredible problem? And he made it a basely partisan political issue, saying, well, Mr. Singh lost his Quebec seats because he didn't understand provincial jurisdiction. Again, it's beside the point. The question is, can we come to a deal? There's nothing to stop the provinces and Ottawa from saying, look, from now on, it will be included, and here's how it's going to be financed. And then you can set national standards. You can make sure they're enforced and applied. That's what was lacking here, Todd.
What do you think this has exposed, Tom?
It exposes the weaknesses in our system. We've built, and I've spent many years as a senior bureaucrat before going into politics, so I'm not denigrating people who do that for a living, but what I am saying is we've built these massive towers full of civil servants who move ideas around. But when something this tragic hits, and it's so concrete, it's almost as if they stayed in their offices and kept moving ideas around as all of those centers were emptying out. There's just one, the Heron Indoor Valve near the airport, where we learned that in the space of a few days, almost 40 residents had died. They were left undernourished. They were dehydrated. They were left in their own waste. And everybody was leaving because the COVID-19 was going so fast. That can't be Canada in 2020, Todd.
In terms of the impact this has now had, and you know, and you were, as you say, a longtime civil servant in Quebec, then you were a provincial member of the national legislature, then federally representing a riding in Quebec. Are you surprised, Tom? I mean, it seems to me that there has been an issue with long-term care facilities in Quebec, as you know, going back decades, just sort of left to their own devices to a certain extent. Not enough oversight, not enough monitoring, not enough checks and balances, really.
Exactly. And it depends on the jurisdiction. You know, for the regulation of professions, the U.S. and Canada are quite similar. But I was the first Canadian elected to the board of something called the Council on Licensure Enforcement and Regulation in the United States when I chaired the large regulatory agency that oversaw the professions in Quebec. And what I learned is, for them, what they call nursing homes are a top priority. They regulate them. They enforce tough rules. They inspect them constantly. There is a lot of private ownership there. But boy, you're going to lose your license like that if you're not following the rules. We don't have that tough approach in Canada. We don't have that culture of enforcement. We can say everything we want about the Americans, but when they have a rule, they have a law, they have a strong tendency to enforce it. We don't.
Is this going to get better in Quebec, do you think?
If the only thing that comes out of this is to say, oh, we found the solution, I sat down with the bureaucrats and they said the solution is more bureaucrats, no, nothing's going to change. If we learn from this that we've actually got to take an approach of saying this is the result that is compulsory. We're not going to discuss the means. Let's talk about the result. And if we get to the result of making those places safe, if we're doing our job of protecting the public, in this case, a very fragile and vulnerable public of elderly, then we've done our jobs.
Tom Mulcair joining us, former NDP leader and nowadays, of course, a political commentator for us here at CTV. Thank you for this, Tom. Appreciate it.
Good to talk to you again, Todd. All the best.
You as well. And you can find out more. The article that Tom wrote for Maclean's. Check out macleans.ca as well for more.